And so first, let's talk about functions and how to use functions. And we've actually seen we've seen a function already. I've done it a couple of times. I haven't done it a lot. But there's a function used to display stuff to the console. We've seen it before, and it's called print. And the way we know print is a function is that it has these parentheses around it, right? And the question is okay, something goes inside those parentheses. And last time we put in something, you can put in variables. You could also put text directly. And I have a habit of using double quotes, but single quotes also work. In fact, Python prefers single quotes, but it accepts double quotes just fine. And if you actually do this second line here, it's going to print out CSE 8A directly after, right? So if this was 1, 2, 3, and you did print, it would print out. Notice that when it print does not put quotes around it. And I'm going to remove this S because it takes really any kind of expression. Any kind of expression. You can put a number in there. So 5, you could put a string like I did CSE 8A. But this prints the expression to the screen. In our case, the screen happens to be the Python shell or console. So that's a function. And we call that or that, either of those red things, we call those arguments. So those are the arguments to a function. And that's a pretty big deal because there's another name for what those are when we write our own functions later today. So arguments, we pass an argument to a function. It does something. In this case, it happens to print. So that's a function we've used before. And there's many, many different types of functions in Python and that we can use. Not to mention we can write our own. Something useful is max. Max takes 2 numbers, must be numbers. Doesn't matter though if they're floats or ints, it does take 2 numbers. And there's a minimum and a maximum. There's also an absolute value, which takes a single number. So let's think about what you would get if you put max 37. I expect max 37 to return the 7, right? That's the larger of the numbers. Min 37, the smallest number is actually a 3. So I expect that to return a 3. And then absolute value, let's do 2 of them. So negative 42 and positive 42. So the absolute value returns the number without its negative sign. So both of these actually return the same answer, 42. So let's actually check out Python. So if I type in max 37, I get my 7. Min 37, absolute value negative 42, absolute value of 42. So we get all those answers. And I could print those out as well. Still the same thing. Yes, these numbers work with floats too. In fact, you can mix. Let's do 3.5 and 3.6. Now let's do 3 and 2.9. What about 3.1 and 2? So it actually allows you to even mix the numbers and it returns whichever one is there. And it returns it of the right type as well. So if I pass an integer and the integer is larger than the float, it returns the integer. If I pass an integer and float and the float's larger, it returns the float. So you can mix and match any versions of those. And that's just the way we use functions. Notice this print function. The argument to the print function was a call to absolute value. Absolute value, the argument to that was negative 42. And so the answer to this was then printed to give us 42. And we could do this with variables and stuff too. We're not just not writing numbers directly. We could pass variables. So A equals 1, B equals 2, max of A and B returns 2. And the arguments now are A and B. So that's just the basics of using functions. We use them a lot. Programming is all about using functions. Python programming more so than other things, but we just make a lot of different functions. And we use them to, for example, repeat or avoid repeating code all the time. For example, when we start writing our own functions, like, why would I do that? Imagine if you had to write max over and over again every time you wanted to do it. Well, now I just have a function that allows me to do one line of code. Believe it or not, there's actually like 3 lines of code, saving us like 3 or 4 lines of code. And I only have to write one thing. So it allows us to save time, to simplify things. Also keeps us from having a lot of mistakes to fix in our programs, which is going to be something you're all going to get very familiar with this quarter, is how to fix mistakes.